All right, well, go ahead and get started. Sean, can you hear me back there? Okay? All right. Let me make sure this is loud enough because they're, I guess, piping into the other rooms. So we're going to talk a little bit about Microsoft Dynamics and in particular Great Plains today. So let's jump right in. So let's go over what we're actually going to be talking about today. So we'll talk a little bit about me and what I do and why I know this information. And what Great Plains is. Is everyone familiar with Great Plains? No? Okay, good. Then we'll go in there and we'll talk a little bit about what Great Plains is and why you should care about Great Plains. We're going to take a look at the security flaws that I've found in the years that I've been doing Great Plains work and some of the solutions. They're not perfect solutions by far, but we are talking about a Microsoft product, so most of us are aware of and are cognizant of having to wire around Microsoft products. So we're going to look at the application level itself, Great Plains as an application. We're going to take a look at what Great Plains does to the SQL Server as it installs. And we're going to take a look at the install problems, some of the problems that are inherent with the actual install of Great Plains. And then we'll take a look at, switch gears, we'll take a look at how to attack it from a pen testing standpoint. And then we'll wrap everything back up again in a summary. I have some additional resources. So as we go through this, some of this might be something that you want to follow up on some research. So I've got this slide share is going to be up, and then some additional contact information, some additional resources if you want to do some additional research on your own. So who am I? Well, I'm the the Chief Security Officer for the Texas Association of Counties, and I've been doing information security now for about 8 years, and IT work for about 14. And I started working with Great Plains about 2000, and this is the time that Microsoft acquired them back in 2000 and actually introduced them into their family of enterprise resource planning software. And in the last 2 years, I've really been ramped back up and engaged in Great Plains. Not only to support it in my own environment, we work with a lot of the counties in Texas who also have Great Plains installed, and I'm also active in the user community for Great Plains. So my day job, I manage the network and security practice for the Texas Association of Counties, and we provide services to hopefully help secure the 254 counties in Texas. So let's answer this question. What is Microsoft Dynamics, and what is Great Plains? Well, Dynamics is the enterprise resource planning software suite from Microsoft. It encompasses multiple different types across multiple different business lines. Dynamics being one of the bigger ones in the mid-level market. There's about 42,000 customers that use Great Plains worldwide right now. Some of the ones that come to mind, Caribou Coffee, UNICEF, several of the United Ways use Great Plains. So it's not necessarily a small level administrative piece of software. It's being used by quite a large market. It's initially when it was created back in the early 90s, it was a piece of accounting software. But in typical Microsoft fashion, they added features and functionality throughout the years. So now you can do sales through it. You could do manufacturing through it. If you have staff that you need to process payroll or HR issues like workers' comp, you can use that for it as well, or for even inventory. So there's a lot of good stuff in GP. Now this is just a few slides of the employee master table that I came across. So what do we have here? We've got employee first name, last name, and their addresses. Okay, so that's a good start. All right, so now we build on top of that. We've got some personally identifiable information, driver's license numbers and their genders. Okay. All right, now we're getting even better stuff. Direct deposit bank accounts. So now we've got their address, their name, direct deposit bank accounts, and driver's license. So what could be better than all of those? Of course, social security numbers. So there's a lot of good stuff in GP, and this is just one table. We didn't even look at any of the sales processing tables where we're taking credit card information or any of the tables that deal with workers' comp claims. A lot of good stuff in there. So what could possibly happen with this data? Well, identity theft comes to mind pretty easily. Bank fraud, now we've got enough information to forge checks. Social engineering, we've got plenty of information for a nice spear phishing attack against any one of those employees. Or even electronic funds transfers. We didn't look at one of the specific tables, but when you're payroll processing, most companies now require direct deposit, so all of that information's in another table. So there's plenty of good stuff. I wish I could show you more of that, but it would be just boring looking at all the data that's in GP. So how do you stay compliant with all this information if you got PII and PHI or even PCI stuff in there? There's a lot of compliance issues that just came to mind. And we could talk about compliance in GP on a completely separate track. So your typical installation looks kind of like this. It's a very simple install. It's not a very complicated piece of software. It gets installed onto an application server that connects back to Microsoft SQL backend. And there's a VAT client that gets installed on the workstations. And then you get this nice, beautiful Fisher-Price desktop that all accountants love because they know how to navigate around things like that. So at the beginning of last year, our executive staff at the Texas Association of Counties changed hands. And they wanted to completely redo the entire way we did business. Now this kind of spurned on all this research and this presentation ultimately, having thrown out what we've been doing for years and having to change gears and some of the things we've seen. So we're going to dive into the application itself, Great Plains, and actually look at some of the security weaknesses that I've seen and then some of the ways to secure it. Now the way that Great Plains works, it calls each company, and I use that company as being a database. So say you have an administrative overreaching corporation, and each line of business has its own separate employees, its own separate inventory, its own separate, it needs to be spaced out separate from the parent organization. So say you have sales and you have field services. Each one of those companies is actually a database, nothing more than that. So in SQL, when you look at it in SQL, you're going to see each of those companies as a separate database. No master security means there's no way as the Great Plains administrator to go into each one of those separate databases and say, all right, Ann has this access to this company, and she doesn't have access to this. You have to go into each individual company and set it up. So there's no way to easily do that. We've got 16 different company databases where I work. So to go in and have to log in and manually administer this is a nightmare. Once again, Microsoft, I don't know what you're doing here, but there's no password policy enforcement by default. We're going to talk about this a little bit more in SQL, but everything that Great Plains leverages for security is done in SQL. There's nothing really in Great Plains that is used to secure it. We're going to look at, it's only native authentication. There is no Windows Active Directory integration. I mean, what are we doing in this day and age? And Microsoft can't get us an application that hooks into Active Directory. There's no auditing. There's no built-in security auditing. But before you want to think of it in another way, Great Plains has auditing. It's obviously it has to be compliant by law. So if a user logs in and they make transactions and post things, that is tracked. The problem is if that user is a power user or if you log in as the SA account, nothing's tracked that way. So you can completely skip all of that auditing there. And then on the back end, on SQL, there's no auditing done. So if you wanted to go and manipulate the tables directly, there's nothing stopping you and nothing to say that someone was even in there. The routine upgrades that Microsoft put out, in particular, I'm thinking of when version 9 went to version 10. I'm talking about major service packs and upgrades. What happened was Microsoft didn't tell anybody that when you went from version 9 to 10, that all of the security that you had set up in 9, like normally most applications would automatically take those permissions over. It stripped that completely down because they changed the security matrix 100%, and now they left it open for everybody. So if you ran an upgrade path, and then you went from version 9 to 10, now you have no security. It fails open instead of closed. So now if you just went through and routinely did this update yourself, you left yourself open, your security wide open. Now, I mentioned before about Great Plains itself. It's basically an administrative server that has an administrative file share on it. This is because Microsoft uses dictionary files to be shared amongst different workstations, so each user will have a common set of dictionary files. Also, Microsoft's love of any files shows forth here too, is that every user has to have access to any files. And we're going to look at one later on and see what that has in it. Code injection. Great Plains is built on Microsoft's Dexterity runtime. And Microsoft said, well, we want to make sure that people can update this software and make it real simple. So we'll give them a code chunk that literally, to install it, you take the chunk and you put it in a folder in the program files directory, in that shared directory. And the next time Great Plains is launched, that code chunk gets automatically integrated into Great Plains. Now, it's good for some things, like there's a SQL security tool that allows you, once you install it in there, if a user has a window that they don't have access to, and they do, if they need to tell the administrator, then that's beneficial. But to have it install and run without any kind of user permissions, and it doesn't even tell you it's been installed, that's going to be a problem, especially if you know how to program anything in Dexterity runtime. Now, I asked for the latest version of this tool from our partner, our Microsoft partner, and he gave me the caveat. He's like, well, I know you know what you're doing with this, but I got to tell you that this tool allows you to manipulate SQL in Great Plains without having to go to SQL. So you got to be careful with it. So here you go. Have fun with the tool. So, yes, so the question was, do you have to be a partner to have access to that tool? Yes, a partner would have to. But at the end, I'll have my information up. And if you want any of those resources, they are locked in customer source. If you want some, we can have a discussion about how to get that stuff. On the shared folder, on the Great Plains server itself, on that administrative share, the FAT client is usually right there. Because everyone has to share the same files, each versions have to be the same. A lot of times what they'll do is they'll take that install from a FAT client, copy it there, and then literally take that exact same set of files and copy it to each workstation. So, I mean, if you want a copy of Great Plains, if it's in the organization, then you just go to that file share and pick up a copy. And then this one requires local administrative rights. I mean, why in the world is Microsoft still running software that requires local admin rights on the workstation? If you want to run that FAT client, it will not operate unless you have local administrative rights on that workstation. Finance people that love to click on nice pictures and nice links, and they have local admin rights, and then they have this installed on top of it, that's just a nightmare waiting to happen. Okay, so here's some of the solutions that I've found. They're more of workarounds than really solutions, because Microsoft's ultimately going to be responsible for fixing this stuff. Microsoft works with, they call them independent solution vendors, and they give these guys a little bit more access to the codes so that they can actually breach some of these gaps. And I do not think, and I've had some conversations with some of the developers of Great Plains, that they're actually going to make any real changes to the application. They're going to kind of funnel this off to their partners so their partners can make money as well. So you don't have to use them for integrating that security like I mentioned before. Like we have 16 different companies, databases where I work. We had to purchase third-party software so that we can administer that from one place, as well as integrating Active Directory and making sure that Active Directory policies are being applied to Great Plains. And then for auditing, not only on the Great Plains side, but hooks into SQL so that if anyone manipulates the data directly in SQL, that it's actually audited and compliant. Now, I put a little star next to this because it's going to sound like I contradict myself later. But really, when you're doing any kind of upgrades to Great Plains, because they do not really give you enough information to understand the changes between, and a lot of times the partners aren't even sure, but it's important to engage a partner that is familiar with what updates are going to be happening, so you don't end up upgrading or updating your software and it rips out all the security that you already have set up. And then on the common files, basically NTFS security has worked great for us. So we only allow people that absolutely have to have access to those folders and those shared dictionary files and those client installs to be able to get there. And then as far as local administrator rights, doing the initial install on the FAT client, when you install it initially, you have to be local administrator to set up the ODBC connection. But I found if you go into program files and actually allow all those users to be able to write to those files, you can take local admin rights away to secure that FAT client so that hopefully no virus would end up owning someone's computer. All right. So we'll switch gears here and talk about some of the problems. It's not necessarily problems with SQL itself. It's how Great Plains installs itself onto SQL. And then some of the things that you're going to have to go back to and fix after the install is completed. Now, it's not unusual for Great Plains or for any application, legacy application, to be installed on a separate instance of SQL, especially if you're running in compatibility mode. I mean, this day and age, why are we still having anything running in native mode? Why is not everything Active Directory authentication? I don't understand. And it's not like Microsoft's trying to fix this problem, because Great Plains 2013, right around the corner, same thing. Local native mode SQL installation. So no Windows authentication means you have to manage each user in SQL itself. So now if you've got hundreds of users in Great Plains, you open up your security logins on SQL and you've got all those users you have to manually maintain. No way to do through Active Directory. Now this one might, be me being a stickler about it. The Odbc ports, I like to have a little variety if possible, to be able to change instead of having 1433, which is very common, everyone knows to listen on, to be able to switch that to a different port, so that, obviously it's still going to be advertised across the network, but at least it's not going to be advertised on the port where it's supposed to be. Now, the DynSA account is a particularly fiendish character in Great Plains. DynSA is the Dynamics SA account that gets created during the initial install. And its intention was to allow Great Plains administrators to add users, to make changes if a person locks themselves out of SQL, to not have to go into SQL and do it. They can actually do it in the application. The problem is, and we tested some of this last Thursday, DynSA could create a user, but it cannot assign it to a company database or change its password or unlock its account. So that install, that guy's pretty much worthless, other than what Great Plains uses that to hook into SQL. So the privilege level on that is completely wrong. So we talk about, does anybody have a SQL instance that is still running in native mode, SQL native mode? Is everyone using like Active Directory and authentication? I don't think there's many applications out today that still run it in native mode. So hardening the SQL instance is going to be an important step. Now in the resources guide, I've got a step-by-step guide from Microsoft on how to do that. Now the problem we've had in our organization is that we did not want our DBA to have access to any information in Great Plains, because you've got payroll information in there, you've got all this information that you don't want a low-level DBA having access to. So what they did, they had him create the instance, gave them the SA password, and immediately changed it. So now our DBA couldn't even come in and take a look at it. So he couldn't come in and harden the SQL instance. So you're going to have some level of trust with either your DBA or your partner to be able to go in and do these types of things if you're not familiar with hardening SQL. You can actually force password policy if you're the SQL administrator. In Great Plains, if you're the administrator, you can say enforce password policy, and it will transfer that or write that down to SQL. But if you're a SQL administrator, you can go in here, and here's a basic SQL login, and you could check on enforce password policy and enforce password expiration. So you can bypass that. By default, Great Plains gets installed with all this turned off. So it'd be good to go in and check that. You can hide the SQL instance. If it's not broadcasting, it's going to be a little harder to find. Now, when I go after anything, I usually look for the low-hanging fruit. So if I don't actually hear anything on 1433, then I generally don't keep looking for it. So you can go into the protocols for that GP instance itself and turn it off. The DynSA account, there is an article about how to configure that guy correctly so that you can actually disable the SA account and use him to administer Great Plains internally. All right, so back to what I was mentioning before with our company and making changes and the new bosses wanting to redo Great Plains. The problem was the company, the partner we hired, they were great on the business analytics, and they were able to come in and say, okay, well, you guys want to do this, you want your chart of accounts to do this, and we can take all of that information and we can put that into Great Plains, and now your business processes are set up the way you want. There's a major problem, though, if the person that's the analyst comes in and actually does the Great Plains install and doesn't even know how to log into a server. So on a couple of occasions, we've seen lack of experience being a problem and actually errors with the install itself. So let's take a look at that and some of the resolutions behind how to fix some of these errors. Great Plains is sold and installed through a partner. There's no way around it. It's a Microsoft Business Solutions. You have to go to a partner. You can't go to Best Buy and pick it up off the shelf. You have to go through them. That's how the partners make money, and they keep funneling money back to Microsoft. So the question you want to ask yourself, why would I allow a business analyst, somebody that knows the business side but not the technical side, install this software? And we've mentioned this before, third-party products, you have to make sure that, I know during our installation, we didn't purchase third-party products to secure the application, and then we had to come and find like $45,000 more after the fact to buy the software to come back and secure the application. So you have to use these third-party products to fill the gaps. And then it's typical to have service accounts for services running on the servers or the SQL instances. The problem was the installs were being done. They wanted domain admin rights on the service account. Why would a service account need so many rights? And you usually install with SA, I understand that, but once you do the install, you can't go back and change SA password. It will break Great Plains. So you can't change it after you've installed it. So some of the solutions to those problems. Now, our partners, it's like a typical partner is just like any consulting group. You're going to have good ones and you're going to have bad ones. You're going to have guys that come in and sell you the moon and stars, but they don't even know how to operate a computer. And that's one of the problems we had. We had guys that came in, they knew the business side really well, but when it came to the install and actually getting the application running correctly, they just did next, finish. So you're going to have to find some people that actually know partners. The Great Plains User Group, and I mentioned that before that I'm active in that community, great group of people that can tell you, yes, this partner's great and this partner's not. So really you're going to have to kind of weigh those things out. It's a standard procedure. You're going to have to use those third parties to secure Great Plains. There's no way around that. And while SA doesn't need to be active after the install, so you can disable it. So what we've been doing was we've been disabling SA and only re-enabling it when we need to run service pack updates and those things that DynSA account should have the access to. So disabling SA itself doesn't leave that footprint open. And then after the install, really doesn't need to have, the service account doesn't need to have so many privileges. You can change that down to the least amount of privilege it needs to do its job. And there's articles on how to do that as well. All right, so pen testing against Great Plains. Now, I'm not like this incredibly awesome, uber elite like pen tester. I use the simplest things possible so that I can find out the information I need quickly. So we're just going to step through a couple of things that we've been able to do, not only with my organization, but working with other organizations to help them secure Great Plains. So whenever I get engaged to help somebody, I always do my reconnaissance, first step, doing some information gathering. And I found a lot of times that on everyone's website, the CEO or CFO or the accounting or finance director, they have a nice bio, and it makes it really nice and convenient to have a little background before you give them a ring or shoot them an email. Also, you can find out pretty easy if Great Plains is running because you're going to see something similar to this. It's a very similar to SharePoint, but it's called Business Portal. Business Portal is Microsoft's web portal that hooks back into Great Plains so that people out in the field or people on the manufacturing floor can do that. So if you happen upon a website that has something similar to this, you're going to know that Great Plains is running in the environment. So one of the easiest things, I'm big on social engineering, just making phone calls. Accounting people love to talk about how they account and how they work and what software they use. So call either the software purchasing agent or call finance, head of finance. Now you know who they are because of the website. Accountants also like free stuff. So do a survey monkey. Say, we're taking a 10-minute survey on what accounting software is and how you like it, and we'll send you an Amazon gift card. And you'll have tons of information afterwards. That's worked pretty well for me. I almost gotten to the point where they give me the password afterwards, if you're good enough. So now we're talking about some scanning and enumeration, and we're looking at the SQL side of things, whether there's an instance there. SQL Ninja, if you are familiar with the Backtrack suite, SQL Ninja's something you could run, or an Nmap. Nmap's got a nice little Discover script that you can run, and it'll actually return all the SQL servers in the environment, all the instances, what service pack levels there are, things that SQL is broadcasting out. The SQL Server Management Studio, if you've got a copy of SQL Server, you can just load that up, and that allows you to connect to different. Did you have a question? The question was if SQL's not broadcasting, none of these would work. I think that's correct. I don't know of any other way. I'm sure SQL's got to be talking somehow. I'm not sure. I can't really speak to that. That's why one of my solutions was to actually hide the instance and not let it broadcast. Right, you'd have to find additional information so that if you wanted to connect directly to that instance, you'd have to find it out another way. We'll actually, when we get to the DexINI file, I'll show you how you could possibly, a possibility on how you could find where that SQL Server connection is, even if it is hidden. So I mentioned the Management Studio, so that allows you to connect to the different instances. Or if you've already popped a box somewhere, the local data sources, the Odbc connections in Windows, will give you where those different instances are. Gaining access, SQL Ninja, SQL Map. Basically brute force and dictionary attacks. We mentioned before that the password policies are not enforced. I found one instance, the password was CAT, C-A-T, and so I'm like, okay, well this is bad. You guys haven't changed this. You guys need to go in and make a more secure password. So I'll come back in a couple weeks. So came back and the password was Dynamics. I'm like, okay, you're not getting the idea behind it. So using those, I found it to be relatively easy to find that information because we're talking about people that aren't familiar with making a secure installation. We're talking about people that come in as business people and they're installing this product. The administrative share, you got the fat client. I'm not a SQL ninja, so I don't go in on the SQL side and do any kind of real manipulation there other than stealing other people's scripts. So I just go in and load Great Plains myself, connect using the credentials I found. And now I've got the Fisher-Price desktop and the nice reports, and I can get all that information. And like we mentioned before, that DexINI file, it's got some great information on it. Now this guy's sitting in that administrative share. So we can get a little bit of information here Build SQL messages equals false. By default, it's turned off. So if you're making any changes on to the build itself, to the software build, it doesn't return any error messages. So you don't know if something's been changed. That SQL last data source equals Dynamics GP 2010. Now, if you do have access to one of the existing FAT client installs, now you've got that ODBC connection that's going to point you to that instance that might be hidden. So if you know of someone that's a GP user, you can attack that. And there's plenty of documentation on how to attack that in Windows XP especially. Last year an update and last tax code update. Those are the two most recent service packs and tax patches that have been installed in the system. And the dictionary version actually is the version number. So if you Google that number, you'll see that that's like GP 2010 Service Pack 3. These last two are great. Show debug messages equals false. So if you're installing anything, nothing's going to be returned if the next one's true. I'm sorry if that sounded confusing. So remember I mentioned that the Dexterity chunk files that you can install, like that's GP support tool. Well, by default in DexINI, it says auto install those chunk files, and by default it says show debug messages equals false. So there's nothing to return any kind of installations happened in that Dexterity runtime. All right, so let's wrap everything back up again. So we found some of the problems, or I expressed some of the problems that I found in Great Plains and some of the solutions within the Great Plains application itself, and took a look at how to actually secure against some of the problems with the SQL installation, like password policy and the local instance. We looked at installer errors and installation errors and how to go and correct those. Took a look at some of the quick and dirty methods of doing some pen testing against GP. And so here's some additional resources. So if you're interested in any of this stuff, the Dexterity development system is how to actually write those Dexterity runtimes. I spoke with one of the developers that said, well, you know, that vulnerability you mentioned, I don't know if that actually could be true because there's only a handful of Dexterity runtime developers in the world. I'm like, well, how hard is that to learn? It's a Microsoft product. The Great Plains developer kit and the support tool and install and troubleshooting guides, all of these are locked away in customer source. So there's my info, and I can get you some more information about that, we'll just say. And the hardening guide for Dynamics AX. Now AX is another product similar to Great Plains. And Great Plains Dynamics, I mentioned before, is a suite of products. AX has a lot of similar problems that Great Plains does on the installation itself. And in fact, two of the other products in the suite, you can actually apply that guide. So if you're wanting to harden it, Great Plains, you can actually use that as a baseline, and nothing's been published for GP yet. So I'm not sure if anyone even is interested in listening to that, but I might actually make a run for that one. SQL 2008 security best practices is how to harden a SQL instance. The DynSA account I mentioned before, how to give that guy permission to be able to do his job. And then the Great Plains user group. It's a really good community of people to get any kind of resources. You can actually speak with the developers and ask questions and find out if you need to find a partner that's better suited for your needs. All right, that's my spiel. Has anyone got some questions or want to throw some tomatoes? Yes. Yes. Yeah, the question is whether or not the user created in SQL can log into GP, correct? Or is it the other way around? Oh, okay. Okay, yeah. So if the question is if you reset the password in SQL, will it also be reset in GP? Yes, because all the GP does, if you go into the security tool, it literally just passes everything onto SQL. That DynSA account is supposed to be configured to that, but actually we found that doesn't work. And if you're going to be adding a user, you have to actually use SA. So you can either set it up in SQL, or you can set it up in the client itself. I mean, the client itself just makes it easier for people that aren't familiar with SQL. But literally, to go in there, if you wanted to say give someone permissions to a particular company database, it would be just a matter of assigning that user a role into that database itself, and it would work fine. So if you change someone's SQL login in SQL itself and then want to log into GP, that's what GP is actually doing to change that password anyway. No, it just passes. Those passwords get passed immediately onto SQL, and everything's handled in SQL. There's no master database that controls user passwords. Everything's password controlled native in the native instance. So all those every one of those users is a local user on that SQL instance. So if you go in, if you opened up SQL and you looked at the logins, you would see all of the Great Plains users in there. And administering 100-some users is pretty difficult when you go through and have to do it through SQL. A pain in the neck. So, did that answer your question? Mm-hmm. Huh.
So like the user can log in using the SQL management studio, they don't have access to their database. But in the same password.
You put it in GP.
And then they can't log in.
I'll have to take a look at that. Because me, for what I've been doing as administration, I don't log into GP. I go into SQL and been unlocking accounts and resetting passwords there.
Well, I tried reversing the password and the hashes are different.
Oh, really? Well, that's cool. I'll have to take a look at that because actually I know one of the developers in Fargo. They're all up there in North Dakota. So I'll have to bring that up because I'd be interested in knowing that answer too. Because I can't think definitively if I reset someone's password in SQL or if it's just being unlocked, an account being unlocked.
I'm not for it. So it's the same thing. It's different passwords.
Huh.
Send me an email.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'd like to look at that some more. And I've got several labs set up and we can go and break stuff. If anyone wants to, by far this is not like the most extensive research ever, and I'm not the most extensive security researcher. I hope to be at some point. So this is a baseline. I'd like some feedback. If anyone's got some cool stuff or something I can use to progress this, I really would like to. Because I'd like to go to Microsoft and say, look, now more people are aware of some of this stuff, so could please fix it now. Anyone else? Questions? Yes.
E for effort. On the deck sign on that last year update, was that a company's year end or is that the last time they pulled out?
So the question is, if that update, the last year-end update, that's actually the last, when you close out a year, a fiscal or a calendar year, when you close that out, there's going to be tax changes that usually happen at end of year. So it'll apply, say, when you close your books out, so like our fiscal year runs from January to December. So for us, it's not a problem because the year-end update's fine, and we close our books somewhere in February. But if your fiscal year is different, it's going to be, so that's those tax updates that were done that need to be applied to that year-end closing. Yes. Everything Great Plains, any kind of updates are all manual. There's no automatic updating for Great Plains.
So does Great Plains kind of notify the company when you have your chemicals in your end?
No, there's no update notification. If you've got a good partner, they will already call you and tell you. We haven't had a good partner for a long time, so I used to go in and actually subscribe to the RSS feed and customer source that would say this new update's available. Would you like to apply it? And that's where I've got myself into trouble, applying a tax update that changed some security afterwards. We had to go back and actually reset some security after doing that. And a tax update should be a real quick thing. I mean, federal withholdings, it shouldn't be super complicated. But you have to be logged in as SA and to run those updates, and you kick everyone out, and it literally updates every table. It goes through and looks through it. And for 16 companies, for us, it takes a long time. So usually my users are out for at least 5-6 hours while it's updating all those databases.
Okay, so it doesn't drive any
Now, the year-end updates and the tax updates are just federal withholdings or sales tax updates or so on and so forth. It doesn't make any changes there. Now, if there's a version change or a service pack, it can have an impact on how things are done. And that's also where we're seeing changes in security that aren't consistent with what it should be. Microsoft, when you upgrade something, you shouldn't mess around with any of the security, or if you do, it should be the same as when you started the upgrade. And we've seen problems where it's been inconsistent. We'll have some companies have the security transferred properly and some not. So you actually have to go back to each one of those and make sure that the security was applied correctly. Okay, right. So after changing the password, the SA password after the install is completed, things break. Because Great Plains is supposed to use that DynSA account to do everything, and I don't think Microsoft's blatantly said, why this happens, or where it's stored. I mean, it'd be nice to find out. I'd like to maybe do some additional research and find out where that's stored. So I found out when you change that SA password and then you go to run an update, it doesn't have permissions to update all the tables. When running GP utilities, doesn't go in and errors out if you've changed the SA password. And I'm not sure why. I'm not sure even why the security level is there. I know it breaks it. So that'd be something also that I'd like to take a look at and see. Because when I talk to the developers, a lot of the guys aren't sure why it does it either. It's kind of like having Facebook on your mobile phone. Why does Facebook have to have access to everything on your phone? Well, it just does because the guys are too lazy that wrote the app to actually make sure that it's got least privilege instead of most. I suspect a lazy programmer. Yeah, using mixed mode. Also, because everybody that does the install for the most part, the partner has the SA password, and they're not really familiar with why SA has so much privilege level, they'll use that for the Odbc connections on the local FAT clients. I've seen that like 9 times out of 10. So what we've done is gone in and actually create a user with enough privileges to make the connection to SQL that's not the SA, so that it actually can do its job without having to have so many elevated privileges. Because especially if you're using Windows XP, popping a Odbc password is pretty simple. Yes? Mm-hmm. Well, it's been 12 years now, and it's still not up to speed. And I can't get an official answer. I had drinks one night with one of the developers, and their kind of stance, I think I mentioned a little bit before, is that now that they've got all these partners that have run circles around the application, done stuff that Microsoft's not been able to do, then their solution is pay these guys lots more money to actually do this. Because I'm looking at, we just went through, his last November, went through 2013. It was kind of like the release. And I snuck into a partners meeting and actually listened to all the stuff. And none of it's changed. It's still the same underlying application. It's got some more whiz-bang stuff, but I mean, nothing on the back end's been fixed. So hopefully Microsoft will wise up at some point, but I think that they like giving all their solution vendors, the guys that are paying them money to have access to the APIs, give them the money so that they can have this relationship, and you end up getting screwed in the process. I mean, it's $45,000 we had to spend in addition to Great Plains install when we went back and actually bought the tools that are needed to secure it. And even then, it was still native mode authentication. The way that the Active Directory piece worked, it is as a separate application database that when you log into Great Plains, it goes and then it checks against Active Directory, but afterwards it goes back to SQL and says, oh, this guy's good. There's still a SQL level login for every user. It just checks against Active Directory. Anyone else?